The story of English origins unfolds across millennia, weaving together threads of migration, conquest, cultural fusion, and linguistic evolution that have shaped one of the world's most influential peoples. Understanding the ancestry of the English requires delving deep into prehistoric movements, ancient tribal confederations, and successive waves of settlement that transformed the British Isles from a Celtic stronghold into the birthplace of a global civilization. Before the arrival of those who would eventually be called English, Britain was inhabited by Celtic peoples who had themselves migrated from continental Europe during the Bronze and Iron Ages. These Celtic tribes, including the Britons, Picts, and Scots, established sophisticated societies with their own languages, religious practices, and political structures. Archaeological evidence reveals complex settlements, impressive hill forts, and intricate metalwork that demonstrate the advanced nature of pre-English British civilization. The Roman conquest of Britain in 43 AD brought 4 centuries of imperial rule, introducing Latin culture, Christian religion, and urban planning, yet the fundamental Celtic character of the population remained largely intact. The true genesis of English identity began in the 5th century AD when Germanic tribes from what is now Denmark, northern Germany, and the Netherlands began migrating to Britain. These groups, primarily the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, arrived initially as foederati, mercenary soldiers employed by Romano-British rulers to defend against Scottish and Irish raiders. However, what began as military assistance gradually transformed into permanent settlement and eventual conquest. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, though compiled centuries later, preserves oral traditions of these early migrations, describing leaders like Hengist and Horsa, who established the first Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in Kent around 449 AD. The Anglo-Saxon settlement was not a single dramatic invasion, but rather a prolonged process spanning several centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests that Germanic peoples had been settling in eastern Britain even during the late Roman period, creating communities that gradually expanded westward. These settlers brought with them their own languages, social structures, and cultural practices, which would form the foundation of English civilization. The term English itself derives from the Angles, one of these Germanic tribes, whose name possibly originated from the Angeln Peninsula in modern Schleswig-Holstein. Genetic studies have revolutionized our understanding of English origins, revealing a complex picture of population continuity and change. Modern DNA analysis indicates that while Anglo-Saxon migration was significant, it did not completely replace the existing British population. Instead, the genetic makeup of modern English people reflects a substantial Celtic substrate overlaid with Germanic contributions. The extent of this Germanic influence varies geographically, being strongest in eastern and central England where Anglo-Saxon settlement was most intensive, and weakest in western regions where Celtic populations maintained greater demographic continuity. The linguistic transformation of Britain provides compelling evidence for the cultural impact of Anglo-Saxon settlement. Old English, the ancestor of modern English, was fundamentally a Germanic language, sharing common roots with Old Saxon, Old High German, and Old Norse. This linguistic shift from Celtic languages to Germanic ones suggests extensive cultural assimilation, whether through population replacement, elite dominance, or voluntary adoption of the newcomer's language for social and economic advantages. Place name evidence supports this pattern, with Anglo-Saxon toponyms dominating much of England while Celtic names persist primarily in Highland and Western regions. The process of English ethnogenesis accelerated during the 7th and 8th centuries as Anglo-Saxon kingdoms consolidated their control over much of what would become England. The Heptarchy, consisting of 7 major kingdoms, including Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria, provided political frameworks within which a distinctly English identity could develop. Christianity, reintroduced through both Celtic and Roman missions, served as a unifying force that helped transcend tribal divisions and create shared cultural institutions. The establishment of monasteries, the development of written literature, and the creation of legal codes all contributed to forging a common English heritage. Viking invasions beginning in the late 8th century added another crucial element to English origins. Initially devastating raids evolved into substantial settlement, particularly in northern and eastern England where the Danelaw was established. These Scandinavian settlers, sharing Germanic linguistic and cultural roots with the Anglo-Saxons, integrated relatively smoothly into existing communities. The Viking contribution to English ancestry is evident in DNA studies, place names, and linguistic borrowings that enriched the developing English language. This Nordic influence reinforced the Germanic character of English culture while adding distinctive elements that distinguished it from continental Germanic societies. The Norman conquest of 1066 represents perhaps the most significant turning point in English ethnic development. While the Norman elite was relatively small in number, their cultural and political dominance profoundly influenced English society. The Normans, themselves descendants of Vikings who had settled in northwestern France, brought French language, feudal institutions, and continental architectural styles. However, rather than replacing English identity, the Norman conquest created a hybrid Anglo-Norman culture that gradually evolved into a distinctly English civilization. Over several generations, Norman settlers adopted English customs while contributing their own traditions to the evolving national character. Medieval England witnessed the gradual fusion of Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Viking, and Norman elements into a coherent English identity. The development of Middle English literature, exemplified by works like Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, demonstrates the cultural synthesis that had occurred by the 14th century. Legal traditions, social customs, and political institutions all bore traces of these various influences while developing distinctly English characteristics. The Hundred Years' War with France paradoxically strengthened English national consciousness by defining England in opposition to its continental neighbors. Modern scientific research continues to refine our understanding of English origins through increasingly sophisticated genetic analysis. Large-scale studies examining thousands of DNA samples have revealed the complex layering of different ancestral populations across Britain. The English appear to represent a unique blend of pre-existing Celtic populations with substantial Germanic immigration, modified by later Viking settlement and limited Norman influence. Regional variations within England reflect different historical experiences, with areas like East Anglia showing stronger Germanic signatures while southwestern counties retain more Celtic characteristics. The story of English origins ultimately reveals a people shaped by successive waves of migration, conquest, and cultural exchange rather than descent from a single ancestral group. This complex heritage has arguably contributed to the adaptability and cultural synthesis that characterized English civilization throughout its global expansion. Understanding these origins provides insight not only into English history, but also into the broader processes of ethnogenesis that have shaped human societies throughout history. The English example demonstrates how modern ethnic identities emerge from the gradual blending of diverse populations over extended periods, creating new cultural syntheses that transcend their constituent elements while preserving aspects of each contributing tradition.